We were never promised anything. No tools, no gods, no map. And yet, we built pyramids with bare hands, cities from mud. This is the entire history of human civilization. Chapter 1. Before history, the dawn of humanity, long before the first city rose from the dust, before the first tool carved the first symbol, the Earth itself was still becoming. 4.54 billion years ago, our planet was born from violent collisions in a young solar system. Earth began as a molten mass, constantly bombarded by asteroids. Over millions of years, it cooled, water collected, an atmosphere thick with carbon dioxide and methane began to form. Then came lightning, heat, and chemistry, the perfect chaos. Somewhere in that chaos, life began. 3.5 billion years ago, the first simple life, single-celled organisms, emerged. For billions of years, they ruled alone. But these microbes did more than survive. They transformed the Earth. Cyanobacteria released oxygen as waste, slowly filling the atmosphere. This set the stage for complex life. Still, life had to fight. Ice ages froze the oceans, volcanoes choked the skies, extinctions came in waves. But each time life recovered, it returned stronger, more diverse, more complex. Then came the Cambrian explosion, around 541 million years ago, when life suddenly diversified. Creatures with shells, eyes, and nervous systems appeared in a blink of geologic time. But most species that ever lived, over 99%, would vanish again. Life is not guaranteed. It evolves or it disappears. Among these survivors were our distant ancestors. Fish evolved into amphibians, then reptiles, then mammals. After the dinosaurs were wiped out 66 million years ago, mammals took the stage, and among them, one lineage would eventually stand up and walk. 6 to 7 million years ago, the first hominins appeared. These were not humans, but they walked on two legs, a critical adaptation. Why bipedalism? Because forests were shrinking. Climate change had begun to turn thick jungle into open savanna. Walking upright freed the hands to carry, to make, to shape. It also allowed better vision across tall grass and helped conserve energy in the blazing sun. The earliest known hominin, Sahelanthropus chadensis, was found in Chad and dates to around 7 million years ago. It had a flat face and small canines, signs of the changes to come. Later came Australopithecus afarensis, living from 3.9 to 2.9 million years ago. The most famous fossil, Lucy, discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia, revealed a being that walked upright but still climbed trees. Her body was a bridge between two worlds, the forest and the open plain. Her brain was still small, around 400 cubic centimeters, just a third of ours today. But evolution had begun its great experiment. That experiment continued with Homo habilis around 2.4 million years ago, the so-called handy man. Found in Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, Homo habilis used Oldowan tools, flakes of stone struck from larger cores. These tools marked the beginning of technology, our first attempt to shape the world instead of simply adapting to it. With tool use came new pressures. Sharper tools meant access to marrow, meat, and fat, critical energy sources. This altered diet changed how our bodies evolved. Smaller guts, bigger brains. Brains are energy hungry, and this shift fed them. Then came Homo erectus, emerging around 1.9 million years ago. Their bodies were tall, strong, and heat efficient. They mastered fire, giving warmth, protection, and cooked food, making nutrients more accessible. Fire changed everything. It extended the day. It built community. It enabled migration. Homo erectus left Africa and spread across Asia and Europe. They were the first humans to walk the world. But they weren't alone. Evolution produced many branches, most of which ended. Among those who thrived were the Neanderthals, adapted to cold Eurasian climates, and the Denisovans, discovered from bone and DNA in Denisova Cave in Siberia, both interbred with Homo sapiens. Our species, Homo sapiens, emerged around 300,000 years ago in Africa. The oldest fossils, from Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, show a tall, slender body, ideal for heat. Their brains were large, their tools advanced, but what truly set them apart was thought. Around 60,000 to 70,000 BCE, Homo sapiens began to migrate. This was not random wandering, it was survival. Climate swings, shrinking resources, competition, all forced movement. Groups crossed into the Middle East, India, Southeast Asia, Europe, and eventually Australia and the Americas. With each new environment, the body adapted. Skin color changed to balance sun exposure and vitamin D production. Facial features evolved for temperature regulation. Limb proportions shifted to conserve or release heat. What we call race today is simply adaptation written in flesh over millennia. Meanwhile, symbolic thought began to flourish. We find it in Blombos Cave in South Africa, 75,000-year-old etched ochre. In Chauvet in Lascaux, France, 30,000-year-old cave paintings of horses, lions, and handprints. These were not mere decorations. They were expressions of memory, of identity, of fear and hope. Early humans hunted in teams, shared food, formed bonds. They buried their dead with flowers and tools, evidence of belief in something beyond life. They used pigments, wore ornaments, carved bone and stone. Language likely emerged gradually, not in a single moment, but as a web of gestures, calls, and meaning. Over generations, it became structured, spoken, shared. Archaeological sites like Olduvai Gorge, Blombos Cave, and Denisova Cave hold the echoes of that time. Tools, bones, carvings, pigments, each artifact a message from a world before memory. We had fire, we had tools, we had thought. The earth had given us challenge, and through evolution and shaped by time, climate, and need, we had answered. But humanity was about to unlock something greater than survival. We would plant, we would stay, and we would change the earth itself. Spirit, art, and mystery, prehistoric world. Long before temples, priests, or scriptures, there was spirit. Not written, not spoken, but felt. The early humans who painted animals on cave walls, who buried their dead with tools, who carved figures from stone, they were doing more than surviving. They were searching for meaning, for memory, for something beyond the physical world. As Homo sapiens settled into clans and tribes, their minds turned toward the invisible. They lived with death. They lived with storms. They watched the stars move across the sky and wondered what moved them. These were not primitive thoughts. They were the roots of everything we now call religion, myth, and meaning. This worldview, now known as animism, imagined a world alive with spirit. Trees, rivers, animals, even rocks had force, presence, intention. The wind was not just wind, it was a message. The hunt was not just survival, it was sacred. Burial rituals as early as 100,000 years ago support this. In sites like Kafze Cave in Israel, skeletons have been found carefully placed, sometimes with ochre, animal bones, or tools. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthals buried a man with pollen from flowers. This wasn't disposal, it was farewell, a recognition of spirit. As populations grew and migrated, oral traditions evolved. Stories told by firelight, passed down through generations. These were not just entertainment, they were instruction. How to hunt, where to find water, what dreams meant, who we were. Some of the earliest known sacred structures appear not in bustling cities, but in a barren hill in southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, dated to around 9,600 BCE. Built before agriculture, before writing, before metal, it is the oldest known temple complex on Earth. Circular stone enclosures, towering T-shaped pillars carved with foxes, birds, snakes, and abstract forms. These weren't homes. They were for gathering, for worship, for ritual. Long before organized religion, Göbekli Tepe shows that humans united not first around farming, but around belief. At the same time, across Eurasia, small female figurines appeared. The Venus figurines, carved from bone, ivory, or stone. Some are round and fertile, others slim and abstract. They appear from 35,000 to 10,000 BCE across thousands of miles from France to Siberia. Their exact meaning is unknown, but the symbolism is consistent: birth, fertility, creation. These may have been idols, charms, or talismans, but they were not toys. They were tools of spirit. Fire rituals also played a powerful role. Fire gave more than warmth or safety. It became central to ceremony. Flames danced as stories were told. Embers burned during burial. Smoke carried prayers into the sky. The crackle of fire became humanity's first altar, and then came the sky. In Nabta Playa, southern Egypt, a stone circle, dating to nearly 5,000 BCE, stands in the desert. It may be one of the world's first astronomical observatories. Aligned with the solstice sun, it hints at an ancient people who not only survived the harsh climate, but tracked the stars. They were already measuring the heavens, marking the seasons, preparing for the future. These early observations gave rise to calendars, harvest cycles, lunar myths, and sun gods. We began to see time not as random, but as divine. Our minds reached far beyond the physical. We imagined spirits, ancestors, gods, not to escape death, but to explain life. Clans grew around shared rituals. Elders became keepers of memory. Totems represented tribes. Animal spirits became guides. Every thunderstorm, eclipse, or dying breath meant something. Nothing was meaningless. Everything pointed to the unseen. The prehistoric world was not silent. It pulsed with drumbeats, chants, flame, and wonder. From ochre-stained caves to windswept megaliths, from whispering ancestors to staring stars, humanity's greatest early creation was not tool or shelter. It was meaning, and soon that meaning would be carved into land itself. We were about to stop moving, to stay, to settle, and to reshape the world not just with spirit, but with soil. The Neolithic Revolution, circa 10,000 BCE. The Neolithic Revolution wasn't a battle. It wasn't a discovery etched in stone. It was a quiet transformation, slow, scattered but world-altering. It began when humans stopped chasing food and started growing it. Around 10,000 BCE, in the region known as the Fertile Crescent, a crescent-shaped band of land stretching from modern-day Iraq through Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Egypt, humans began to domesticate wheat, barley, and legumes. It was a response to climate change. The last ice age had ended. Glaciers retreated. The earth warmed. Plants flourished. Animals migrated. And humans, after millennia of hunting and gathering, saw opportunity. The first evidence of organized farming comes from sites like Jericho, in present-day Palestine, one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. Surrounded by a massive stone wall as early as 8,000 BCE, Jericho wasn't just a village. It was a symbol. People weren't just surviving, they were building. To the north in modern Turkey lay Çatalhöyük, a dense and complex settlement with no streets. Homes were packed side by side, accessed by ladders through the roofs. Inside, walls were decorated with bull's horns and murals, possibly linked to fertility or spiritual rites. Archaeologists have found burials under the floors, with the dead tucked beneath the living, a shared space between life and death. These early farming villages weren't random. They were placed near rivers, where water flowed and soil was rich. Over time, people developed irrigation systems, channels, canals, and ditches that brought water to crops even during dry seasons. This required planning, cooperation, leadership. Humans domesticated animals too. Sheep, goats, pigs, and later cattle became sources of meat, milk, leather, and labor. Wolves, tamed and bred for temperament, became the first dogs, our earliest companions. With food stored and animals nearby, life began to change. People could now stay in one place. They built permanent homes. They crafted pottery to store grain and water. Weaving became essential. Plant fibers and wool turned into clothes and trade goods. With new materials came new technologies: grinding stones, bone needles, sickles, polished axes. Every tool was a step toward mastery of the land. But farming came at a cost. Archaeological studies of Neolithic skeletons reveal that early farmers were shorter, suffered more disease, and had worse teeth than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. A diet rich in carbohydrates and low in protein, combined with crowded living conditions and close contact with animals, introduced malnutrition and new infections. Social life also changed. Work became gendered. In many early societies, men controlled the fields and animals, while women processed food and managed households. With food surplus came wealth. With wealth came property. And with property came inequality. Landowners gained power. Lineages mattered. Status became hereditary. No longer equal members of roaming bands, people were now organized by roles, duties, and class. Some farmed, some made tools, some led. Others obeyed. Trade emerged between villages: salt, obsidian, flint, woven textiles, pottery. Goods were carried across rivers, valleys, and mountain paths. Bartering became common. Villages that had access to unique resources held leverage. A new kind of power, economic power, was born. Seasons became sacred. The success of a harvest depended on knowing when to plant, when to reap, when the rains would come. So humans looked to the sky. Calendars were carved in bone, stone, and memory. Cycles of the moon, positions of stars, the sun's rising and setting. These patterns weren't just practical, they were mystical. Fertility cults arose. Across Europe and the Near East, archaeologists have uncovered Venus figurines, carvings of wide-hipped women, often faceless, exaggerated in shape. They were likely symbols of fertility, abundance, and the earth itself. Birth and growth became sacred mysteries. Fire rituals, planting festivals, and symbolic dances took root. It wasn't just the land that was cultivated, it was meaning. With every season, humanity stepped further away from its wild past and closer to civilization. But this transition also meant vulnerability. Drought could ruin a harvest. A failed crop meant hunger or death. Villages sometimes clashed over water or grazing land. For the first time in history, land had value, and people were willing to fight for it. The Neolithic Revolution wasn't a single moment. It unfolded over thousands of years, across regions as far apart as the Fertile Crescent, China's Yellow River, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica. Each region found its own seeds, its own animals, and its own way forward. But the pattern was always the same: food, settlement, specialization, and structure. It was the beginning of everything we now call civilization. And yet, for all the progress, humans still lived in small, unfortified communities. There were no empires, no kings, no armies, not yet. But the blueprint was there: walls, tools, trade, surplus, status, and soon, Someone would take control of it all. Chapter 4. Birth of Civilization. Civilization did not begin in a palace. It began in the dirt, where people gathered, planted, stored, and stayed. It began when scattered villages turned into something more, something organized, structured, powerful. It began in Mesopotamia. The first cities, Eridu, Uruk, and Ur. Long before pyramids rose or armies marched, 3 cities changed the course of human history forever: Eridu, Uruk, and Ur. In Eridu, around 5400 BCE, we see the first signs of the city. Not just shelters, but planning. Not just people, but priests. Built in the heart of southern Mesopotamia, Eridu grew around a sacred temple to the god Enki, the deity of water, wisdom, and creation. As the temple rose, so did the people's belief that their lives could be organized, not by nature alone, but by design. By 4000 BCE, Eridu was surpassed by Uruk, the first city in human history to exceed 50,000 people. It was massive. It had districts, walls, markets, and monumental temples. It had government. It had labor systems. It was a city in every modern sense of the word. At its heart stood towering ziggurats, stepped platforms built brick by brick, rising toward the sky. These were not houses of worship alone. They were centers of administration, wealth, and ritual power. Temples didn't just pray to the gods. They owned land, controlled grain, and managed workers. This was where faith met function. Then came Ur, emerging by 3800 BCE, a city of splendor and complexity. Excavations revealed royal tombs filled with gold, musical instruments, jewelry, and sacrificial servants. Society was no longer flat. It had layers: elites, artisans, farmers, slaves. These were no longer villages. They were engines of human development, the invention of writing. But cities needed memory. Oral tradition was not enough. Trade, property, taxes, gods, laws, they needed to be recorded. So, around 3200 BCE, the scribes of Uruk began pressing marks into wet clay with a reed stylus. Cuneiform was born, the world's first writing system. At first, it tracked grain rations, livestock, labor, and temple offerings, but it quickly evolved. Soon, cuneiform carried contracts, laws, myths, hymns, and royal decrees. It transformed language from breath to permanence. It made abstraction real. This was no longer the age of memory. This was the age of record. Writing turned power into permanence. A king's words could outlive his reign. A god's name could be carried across centuries. Trade deals could span generations. Without writing, there is no civilization. And it began here, in mud with a stylus and a need to remember. The first great inventions: wheel, plow, sail, calendar. But the written word was not the only leap forward. Cities gave rise to technology, not by curiosity, but by necessity. Around 3500 BCE, the wheel emerged. First used for pottery, it soon transformed transport. Carts rolled across dusty paths, goods moved faster, trade expanded. The plow, pulled by animals, cut deep into the soil. It allowed for large-scale farming. Grain became power. The sail, stretched over reed boats, caught the river winds. Mesopotamians now traveled faster, carried heavier loads, reached farther. The calendar followed, born not from science, but survival. Farmers watched the stars, the sun, the flood seasons. Time became a tool. Months, days, festivals, taxes, all tied to the skies. These inventions were not random strokes of genius. They were answers to pressure, solutions to scaling society. Each one allowed civilization to grow, outward and upward. The first laws, Code of Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi. But with cities came conflict, theft, land disputes, violence, grain hoarding, social tension. And so laws were carved into stone, justice, not as tradition but as decree. The Code of Ur-Nammu, written around 2100 BCE, is the oldest known legal code in human history. It laid out fines for theft, compensation for injury, punishment for false accusations. It was simple but radical, the idea that justice could be standardized. Then came the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed around 1754 BCE. It was harsher. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Over 280 laws, covering wages, marriage, trade, injury, inheritance. For the first time, law was not in the hands of the strong. It was written, known, enforced. Society had rules, and rulers were now bound to more than just force. The civilization blueprint. The city was no longer an experiment. It was a model. Every key feature of modern civilization appeared here first. Urban centers with planning and zoning, temples and centralized power, writing and record-keeping, trade and standard measurements. Technological innovation driven by need, class structures, inequality, and governance, written law to enforce stability. Mesopotamia did not just invent civilization, it defined it. And though the cities of Uruk, Ur, and Eridu would eventually fade, their blueprint remained. Every city that came after, from Athens to Babylon to Rome, borrowed from this ancient design. This was no longer humanity surviving. This was humanity organizing, ruling, building legacies. The wild world was being tamed, not by nature, but by law, clay, and will. And for the first time in history, we called it civilization. Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians. The rise of cities was only the beginning. As villages turned into city-states, a new force took shape, civilized power. The first to master it were the Sumerians. By 3000 BCE, Sumerian city-states like Ur, Uruk, Eridu, and Lachish were thriving. Each had its own ruler, its own god, its own laws. The Sumerians built monumental architecture, developed advanced irrigation systems, standardized weights and measures, and refined cuneiform writing into a full script. But their greatest legacy may be this: they created the first civilization in history that left behind comprehensive records of daily life, law, worship, poetry, economy, and war. Then came the Akkadians. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad, a man of humble origins, conquered the Sumerian cities and forged the world's first known empire. His rule stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. He built roads, unified administration, and spread Akkadian as a common language. His empire collapsed within 2 centuries, but it proved something new: that power could cross rivers, cultures, and borders if written, planned, and enforced. Next rose the Babylonians, with Babylon at their center. Under King Hammurabi, Babylon became a city of order and influence. His code was law. His city was rich in trade and tradition. And from his reign, civilization took on its most enduring structure: law over land, faith over fear, ruler over realm. But it was the Assyrians who would bring civilization to its harshest edge. From 1350 BCE onward, they built a war machine: siege towers, iron weapons, professional armies. They were feared across the Near East, but they were not only warriors, they collected knowledge. Their capital, Nineveh, held one of the world's first great libraries, 30,000 clay tablets preserved for the future. Civilization had grown not only in strength, but in memory. The Epic of Gilgamesh and recorded religion. In a land of rising temples and written law, a new kind of memory emerged: story. On clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Nineveh, archaeologists uncovered the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving work of literature in the world. Written in Akkadian cuneiform, it dates to circa 2100 BCE, though earlier versions may have existed orally for centuries. The story follows Gilgamesh, a powerful king of Uruk, and his companion Enkidu, a wild man tamed by civilization. They battle monsters, defy gods, and search for immortality. But in the end, they find no escape from death, only meaning in memory. The epic asks questions no other text had yet preserved. What is the purpose of life? Why must we die? Can humans become gods? It introduced themes of love, grief, pride, mortality, and the afterlife, making it more than myth. It was philosophy set in stone. This was also the dawn of organized religion. Each Mesopotamian city had a patron god: Enlil of Nippur, Inanna of Uruk, Marduk of Babylon. Temples weren't just sacred, they were the centers of power, wealth, and record-keeping. Priests ruled alongside kings. Festivals, offerings, omens, and sacrifices tied divine favor to political success. Heaven and earth were no longer separate. The gods lived in ziggurats, walked among kings, punished drought with floods, and rewarded devotion with prosperity. Faith was woven into law, economy, and time itself. The Bronze Age, 3,300 to 1200 BCE. Civilization was now armed. Literally. The Bronze Age, beginning around 3,300 BCE, brought a new metal to the world, a mix of copper and tin, forged into tools, armor, and weapons. Harder and more durable than stone or copper, bronze allowed empires to expand, armies to grow, and cities to be defended or destroyed. With bronze came specialization: blacksmiths, soldiers, metal traders. Society stratified even further. Trade routes expanded across the ancient world to transport tin and copper, linking Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley, Anatolia, and beyond. This was an age of chariots, fortresses, standing armies, and powerful monarchs. Kings built walls not just to protect people, but to display strength. But bronze came at a cost. Tin was rare. When trade routes collapsed, so did empires. By 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age would come to a dramatic, violent end across the Near East, in what historians call the Bronze Age collapse. Cities were sacked, records vanished, peoples scattered. But by then, civilization had already spread its roots. Writing, law, cities, story, worship, power. Everything that defines the modern world began in this era. And though kings fell and palaces crumbled, the blueprint of civilization, written in clay, forged in bronze, and preserved in memory, would never be forgotten. Chapter 5. Kingdoms of the Nile and Indus. Civilization did not rise in just one place. While cities flourished in Mesopotamia, rivers farther east and south were also giving birth to something monumental. Two civilizations, separated by deserts, oceans, and languages, were shaping their worlds through structure, power, and brilliance. One built tombs that touched the sky. The other laid cities with mathematical precision. Both disappeared with mysteries that still challenge us today. Ancient Egypt, pyramids, pharaohs, and the afterlife. The Nile River was more than a source of water. It was the lifeline of an empire. Every year it flooded with clockwork regularity, leaving behind black, fertile silt. In that gift from nature, the people of Egypt planted crops, built cities, and founded one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. By 3100 BCE, Upper and Lower Egypt were united under a single crown. The first pharaoh, Narmer or possibly Menes, wore the double crown, symbolizing the union of the land. This wasn't just a political achievement, it was the birth of divine kingship. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was a god on earth, a living bridge between heaven and humanity. He commanded the floods, the harvest, the army, and most importantly, the afterlife. Egyptians believed that death was not the end. It was a transition, a journey through the duat, the underworld, where the soul would be judged by Osiris. If the heart was lighter than the feather of truth, eternal life awaited. To prepare, kings built the pyramids, the greatest tombs the world has ever seen. At Giza, around 2600 BCE, Pharaoh Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid, a structure of over 2 million limestone blocks weighing up to 80 tons each. No wheels, no iron tools, no beasts of burden. Just human ingenuity, manpower, and vision. It stood 481 feet tall, the tallest man-made structure for over 3,800 years. These pyramids were not monuments to ego, they were temples to eternity. Inside were traps, tunnels, treasures, and texts, all designed to guide the soul to the stars. Egypt's social structure was equally precise. At the top, the pharaoh. Below him, viziers, priests, scribes, artisans, farmers, and slaves. Order was maintained through Ma'at, the divine balance of truth, harmony, and justice. Disruption wasn't just illegal, it was unholy. Egyptian engineers were masters of stone, irrigation, and scale. They built canals, granaries, temples with massive columns and intricate carvings. Their mathematics allowed them to divide land, design architecture, and predict the stars. Calendars based on the heliacal rising of Sirius told them when the Nile would flood. This was no primitive kingdom. It was a calculated cosmos, a machine of state, faith, and survival. Indus Valley civilization, Mohenjo-Daro, grid cities, and engineering brilliance. While Egypt looked to the sun, god Ra, and ruled by divine blood, a quieter, more enigmatic civilization was thriving to the east, in the valley of the Indus River, in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and Dholavira flourished, not with towering temples or tyrant kings, but with design, cleanliness, and balance. Mohenjo-Daro, uncovered in the 1920s, shocked the world. Streets were laid out in grids, aligned with cardinal directions. Homes had private bathrooms. There were covered sewer systems running beneath the city, 4,000 years before modern plumbing. Each house was made of uniform bricks, baked to specific standards. Some had 2 floors, courtyards, and wells. There were standardized weights and measures and evidence of long-distance trade with Mesopotamia. Seals with animals, script, and geometric designs were found as far as Sumer. At the heart of Mohenjo-Daro stood the Great Bath, a large watertight tank surrounded by colonnades and changing rooms. It may have been a site for ritual purification, or perhaps something we don't yet understand, because that's the puzzle. We still can't read their writing. Hundreds of symbols appear on seals and pottery, but no Rosetta Stone has been found. Without their voice, we interpret through ruins. Even more mysterious, their collapse. By 1900 BCE, Indus cities were in decline. Streets fell into disrepair. Trade slowed, bricks crumbled. Why? Some point to climate change, the weakening of the monsoon. Others to tectonic shifts, which may have altered the course of rivers. There is no evidence of war, invasion, or rebellion. It was a quiet disappearance, the slow unraveling of a civilization that once ran like clockwork. But what they left behind reshaped history, proof that advanced cities, sanitation, and organization could emerge without kings, without pyramids, without war. Ancient Nubia and Kush, the forgotten power of the south. South of Egypt, along the Upper Nile, rose another kingdom, Nubia and later Kush. For thousands of years, the Nubians traded gold, ivory, ebony, and incense. They mastered archery, built cities, and raised their own pyramids, smaller, steeper, clustered in the desert sands of Meroe. Far from being Egypt's shadow, Kush at times conquered Egypt itself. In the 8th century BCE, the 25th dynasty of Egypt was ruled by Kushite pharaohs. They wore double crowns and ruled from both Napata and Thebes. Their culture blended Egyptian religion with local traditions. The Nile was not one kingdom's river. It was a thread connecting multiple civilizations, each with its own genius, language, and soul. From the Nile to the Indus, these ancient river kingdoms left behind more than stone. They left systems of urban planning, state administration, ritualized religion, advanced water engineering, written and symbolic language, trade networks across regions. They showed that civilization could emerge through divine kingship or urban design, through spiritual obsession or logical order. Though their timelines ended, their blueprints did not. Every empire that came after, from Persia to Greece to Rome, stood on the shoulders of the Nile and the Indus. They were the architects of the ancient world. And what they began would echo across history. Chapter 6: The Rise of Empire and Warfare. Civilization had brought cities, law, and worship, but it also brought something else: ambition. The desire not just to rule a city, but to rule everything beyond it. Rivers, mountains, peoples, gods. The age of empires had begun, and war, organized, calculated, industrial, became its engine. The rise of empires: Hittites, Assyrians, and Persians. The first great empires didn't appear overnight. They rose from the ruins of older kingdoms fueled by iron, conquest, and ideology. In the highlands of Anatolia, around 1600 BCE, a warrior people emerged, the Hittites. At their peak, they ruled over much of modern-day Turkey and northern Syria. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress city carved from stone and fire. Within its walls lay archives of clay tablets written in cuneiform, treaties, laws, and battle records. The Hittites were among the first to smelt iron on a large scale. They forged swords, armor, and tools that outmatched the bronze of their rivals. This marked a turning point in world history. The Iron Age had begun. They didn't just fight, they negotiated. One of the world's oldest surviving peace treaties was signed between the Hittites and the Egyptians after the Battle of Kadesh, circa 1274 BCE, a massive chariot clash between Pharaoh Rameses II and Hittite king Muwatalli II. It ended not in destruction, but in diplomacy. But if the Hittites ruled with strategy, the Assyrians ruled with fear. From 1350 BCE to 600 BCE, the Assyrians built one of the most brutal and advanced empires the world had seen. Their warriors were relentless. Their kings, like Tiglath-Pileser III, Sargon II, and Ashurbanipal, expanded the empire from Mesopotamia to Egypt. They deployed massive standing armies, perfected siege warfare, and terrorized enemies with psychological tactics. Rebellious cities were crushed, their people deported or impaled. Yet they were not only destroyers. The Assyrians were administrators, engineers, and record keepers. In their capital, Nineveh, they built roads, aqueducts, and libraries. The famed library of Ashurbanipal held over 30,000 tablets, preserving everything from myths to medicine, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. But no empire is eternal. The Assyrians fell to a coalition of Babylonians and Medes around 612 BCE, and their cities burned. But from the ashes rose something new, something bigger: the Persian Empire. By 550 BCE, Cyrus the Great had united the tribes of Persia and overthrown the Medes. He marched west and absorbed Babylon without bloodshed. He allowed exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands. His rule wasn't just military, it was moral. Under Darius I and Xerxes, the Persian Empire stretched from India to Egypt to the Aegean, the largest empire the world had ever seen at the time. They built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway connecting the empire with way stations and mounted couriers, the ancient world's first express communication system. They developed standard currency, weights, and laws. They divided the empire into satrapies or provinces, each governed locally but loyal to the great king. The Persians did not erase cultures. They absorbed them. And at the center of this massive multicultural state was a new spiritual idea: Iron Age warfare, chariots, swords, and fortresses. The Bronze Age had given humanity organized conflict, but the Iron Age turned war into a machine. The chariot became the tank of the ancient world, fast, deadly, and elite. First used by the Hittites and Egyptians, it evolved into a platform for archers and commanders. Iron swords, cheaper and stronger than bronze, flooded the battlefield. Infantry, armies grew. Armor was reinforced. Shields became standardized. Massive fortresses rose across the Near East, with stone walls, towers, and gates. Siege weapons, like battering rams and ladders, were used to breach defenses. Assyrians deployed entire divisions for siege warfare. They dug tunnels beneath walls, used flaming arrows, and recorded victories on stone reliefs that lined palace walls like ancient newsreels. This was not senseless violence. It was strategic, planned, and often used to enforce empire. War had become an extension of politics and religion, Zoroastrianism and the philosophy of dualism. In the heart of the Persian Empire, a prophet named Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, preached a radical idea: that the world is a battlefield, not of nations, but of good and evil. This was the birth of Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of the Persian elite. At its center was Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, creator of all that is true and just. Opposing him was Angra Mainyu, the spirit of destruction and falsehood. Humans were caught in the middle. Their choices mattered. Their morality, not just their rituals, shaped the destiny of the soul. It was the first recorded monotheistic religion built not on myth but ethics. Zoroastrianism introduced heaven and hell, resurrection, free will, and final judgment, concepts that would later influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In a world where gods were feared, Zoroastrianism called for wisdom, truth, and righteousness. It was both a spiritual awakening and a political philosophy used by Persian kings to justify tolerance, justice, and imperial unity. The Hittites gave us diplomacy. The Assyrians gave us state terror and imperial logistics. The Persians gave us roadways, rights, and spiritual vision. Empires became more than military machines. They became civilizational systems. And war was no longer an accident. It was a tool, a weapon, a strategy, a way of life. Humanity had entered an era where battles could shape borders, but ideas could shape history. Absolutely. Here's the completed and extended Chapter 6, The Rise of Empire and Warfare, now including the first global trade networks, the Persian postal system and road infrastructure, the rise of Alexander the Great and his impact on cultural diffusion. This continuation maintains the cinematic, engaging, and historically grounded style and connects seamlessly with the themes already established in the earlier section of the chapter. The first global trade networks. As empires expanded, so did their needs for resources, luxury goods, and ideas. Conquest opened borders, infrastructure connected cities, and soon trade was no longer local. It was global in the ancient sense. The world's first international trade networks began to form. From Anatolia, tin moved south to fuel bronze production. Egyptian gold flowed north into the Levant. Mesopotamian textiles and tools were traded as far east as the Indus Valley. Harappan seals, inscribed with mysterious script, were discovered in Sumerian cities. The lapis lazuli mines of Afghanistan supplied dazzling blue gemstones to Mesopotamia and Egypt. Cedar wood from Lebanon, frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, ivory from Africa, and silks from China, all found their way into the hands of kings and merchants. Though these ancient trade routes lacked a central system, they laid the groundwork for what would later become the Silk Road and Indian Ocean trade networks. But it was the Persians who first attempted to organize these exchanges. The first postal system and royal road, Persian Empire. At its peak, the Achaemenid Persian Empire was the largest the world had ever seen. Over 5 million square kilometers, home to more than 50 million people. To govern such vast territory, they needed more than armies. They needed connection. So they built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile artery stretching from Masusa in Persia to Sardis in Anatolia. Along it were way stations where couriers could rest, switch horses, and keep moving. This was the world's first true postal system. Messages that once took months now arrived in days. Herodotus, the Greek historian, marveled at the speed and organization, writing, "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness of night prevents these couriers from completing their appointed course." Sound familiar? That motto survives on U.S. postal buildings to this day, and it came from ancient Persia. But the Royal Road wasn't just for messages. It became the spinal cord of trade, diplomacy, military deployment, and culture. Along its routes, merchants carried goods, scholars carried ideas, armies marched, empires moved. Alexander the Great and the age of cultural diffusion. But even the greatest empires fall, and from the west, a new force was rising, led by a boy king who would conquer the known world before his 33rd birthday. Alexander the Great, crowned king of Macedon in 336 BCE, inherited his father's military machine and expanded it beyond all precedent. Within a decade, he had defeated the Persian Empire, overthrown Darius III, and marched from Greece to Egypt to India. He never lost a battle. He founded over 20 cities, including the most famous, Alexandria in Egypt. But Alexander didn't just spread territory, he spread culture. In what historians call Hellenistic diffusion, Greek language, art, science, and architecture spread across the former Persian lands, and in return, Alexander adopted elements of Persian dress, customs, and even married local women. In Babylon, he ruled as a Mesopotamian king. In Egypt, he was proclaimed son of the god Amun. In Persia, he appointed satraps and allowed local traditions to continue. After his death in 323 BCE, his empire fractured, but the fusion of cultures he ignited endured. Greek ideas blended with Persian administration, Egyptian religion, and Indian philosophy. Libraries rose, cities thrived, commerce exploded. The world, for the first time, began to feel connected, not by war alone, but by shared knowledge, shared language, and shared ambition. But it also introduced something deeper: the realization that ideas could travel as far as armies, and that power could last longer in stone, in language, in faith, than in steel alone. Empires rose from fire and fell by flame, but their impact endured, because what they built, roads, scripts, systems, philosophies, would lay the foundation for everything to come next. And soon, far to the west, on a small peninsula called Italy, another power was rising. Not a kingdom, not a tribe, but a republic. Chapter 7. The Greeks and the Birth of Ideas. Before skyscrapers, before satellites, before the modern world took its shape, there were questions. Who are we? What is justice? What is truth? What is beauty? The people who asked these questions didn't just change their world, they changed ours. Welcome to ancient Greece, the birthplace of ideas. Democracy in Athens, militarism in Sparta. By the 5th century BCE, the Greek world was a patchwork of city-states, independent communities, each with its own laws, government, and identity. The two most famous and most different were Athens and Sparta. Athens was a port city, a naval power, and a hub of commerce and culture. But it was also the place where something radical was born: democracy. Under leaders like Solon, Cleisthenes, and later Pericles, the Athenians experimented with rule by the people. Citizens, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners, gathered in assemblies, voted on laws, and debated policy. The ecclesia, or Athenian assembly, was the heartbeat of this early democracy. Athens was messy, vibrant, loud, a city of open thought and public argument. But to the south, Sparta lived by a different code. A landlocked, militarized society. It focused not on debate, but on discipline. From age 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and placed in state-run military schools. They were taught to fight, endure pain, and follow commands. Spartans didn't build walls. They believed their warriors were their walls. While Athens thrived on culture, Sparta thrived on control. And yet, together, these two cities helped define what it meant to be Greek. Philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Nowhere was the Greek thirst for understanding more powerful than in philosophy, the love of wisdom. In the streets of Athens walked a man who refused to give answers, only questions. Socrates, born around 470 BCE, challenged everything. He asked students, leaders, and strangers, what is justice? What is virtue? He was executed for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods, but his ideas could not be silenced. His student, Plato, took those questions and built the first known academy in the Western world. In his dialogues, Plato explored truth, the soul, and the ideal state. He imagined a world beyond the material, a realm of perfect forms where absolute truth lived. Plato's student, Aristotle, grounded thought in observation and logic. He cataloged plants and animals, studied ethics, politics, physics, rhetoric. He believed knowledge came through experience, not imagination. Together, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle laid the foundation of Western philosophy, logic, ethics, politics, science, ideas that still define modern thought today. Literature and drama, Homer, tragedy, and the human spirit. But Greece didn't only question, it told stories, epic, emotional, unforgettable. Centuries before Plato, a blind poet named Homer sang of war and honor. His Iliad and Odyssey, composed around 800 BCE, captured the age of heroes, Achilles, Hector, Odysseus. Through war and wandering, Homer gave the Greeks a shared mythology, a heroic past. Later came tragedy and comedy, new forms of storytelling performed in open-air theaters. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides wrote dramas about fate, pride, betrayal, justice, and the will of the gods. Their characters, Oedipus, Antigone, Medea, were flawed, powerful, human. These plays weren't entertainment alone. They were political, philosophical, religious experiences, forcing audiences to confront their values and their fears. Greece, for the first time, turned the mirror on humanity itself, the Olympics and pan-Hellenic identity. Though the city-states often fought one another, they shared a sense of common Greek identity, language, religion, customs. Every 4 years, warriors, athletes, and poets from across the Greek world gathered at Olympia to compete in the Olympic Games. Beginning around 776 BCE, the Olympics celebrated not just sport, but unity. Athletes competed nude, symbolizing equality and human form. Victors earned olive wreaths, eternal glory, and status across the Hellenic world. The games were sacred, held in honor of Zeus, king of the gods. During the Olympics, all wars paused. Enemies laid down arms, cities sent their best, not with swords, but with strength, speed, and skill. Math, architecture, and science, Pythagoras, Euclid, and the golden ratio. Greek achievements weren't limited to words. They built with precision, reasoned with numbers, and studied the natural world. Pythagoras, the mystical mathematician, taught that numbers held divine power, and gave us the Pythagorean theorem, still taught today. Euclid, working in Alexandria, compiled centuries of geometry into a single book. The Elements, the foundation of modern math. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, believed disease had natural causes, not divine punishment. He urged doctors to observe, diagnose, and treat ethically, and the Hippocratic Oath still guides physicians worldwide. Archimedes, Anaximander, Heraclitus, and others pushed the boundaries of science, engineering, and cosmology. Greek thinkers studied stars, motion, biology, and architecture, seeking balance, form, and truth in all things. Temples like the Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, goddess of wisdom, used precise proportions, the golden ratio, and optical illusions to appear perfectly straight. a marriage of art and mathematics. For the Greeks, beauty wasn't ornament, it was order, the legacy of the Greeks, from democracy to drama, from mathematics to medicine, from sculpture to schools. The Greeks redefined what it meant to be human. They didn't just build temples and cities, they built thought. They left behind the blueprint for government, ethics, reason, and the scientific method. And though their city-states would one day fall to Roman power, their ideas would never die, because empires crumble, but wisdom endures. Chapter 8: Rome, Law, Empire, and Legacy. In the shadow of the Greeks, another world was rising, more vast, more enduring, more organized. It did not merely ask what it meant to be human, it built a system to rule them all. This is the story of Rome, a republic that became an empire, and an empire that became an idea. It begins not with a crown, but with a legend, from republic to empire. According to Roman myth, twin brothers Romulus and Remus, raised by a she-wolf, founded the city in 753 BCE. But what followed was no fairy tale. It was centuries of war, betrayal, and political genius. By 509 BCE, Rome overthrew its last king and declared itself a republic. Res publica, the public thing. Power shifted to senators, elected magistrates, and assemblies. The Roman Republic was born, a system built to avoid tyranny, but obsessed with control. Rome expanded through war. It absorbed neighbors, then rivals. By 264 BCE, it clashed with the mighty Carthage in the Punic Wars. Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants, but Rome endured. It didn't just win wars, it learned from them. Borrowing God's ideas and technologies, it expanded across the Mediterranean. But the Republic had a flaw. Power concentrated in generals, not the Senate, and one man would tear the system apart. Julius Caesar, Augustus, and the birth of empire. Julius Caesar, a brilliant general and shrewd politician, rose through the ranks of Roman power. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River, a direct challenge to the Senate, and ignited civil war. He won, and in 44 BCE, he declared himself dictator for life. But Rome had not forgotten its hatred of kings. On the Ides of March, Caesar was stabbed 23 times in the Senate, by friends, allies, even protégés. His death plunged Rome into more chaos. But from that chaos rose a new kind of leader. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, later known as Augustus, defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. In 27 BCE, he became Rome's first emperor. Cloaked in Republican language, he claimed to restore the Republic. Instead, he buried it. Under Augustus, Rome entered the Pax Romana, 200 years of relative peace, wealth, and imperial expansion. The empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. Over 60 million people, hundreds of cultures, all ruled under one name, Rome. Roman engineering, aqueducts, roads, and amphitheaters. But Rome did not just conquer with legions, it conquered with infrastructure. The Romans built aqueducts, stone channels that carried fresh water from mountains to cities, spanning hundreds of miles. Cities like Rome, Carthage, and Antioch had flowing water, fountains, public baths. A miracle of planning and hygiene. They built roads, over 250,000 miles perfectly straight, paved and enduring. All roads lead to Rome wasn't poetry, it was logistics. They built amphitheaters, the most famous being the Colosseum, completed in 80 CE. It could seat 50,000 people who watched gladiators fight, animals clash, and criminals die, all for spectacle and social order. Rome was a civilization of stone, arches, and concrete. Its buildings still stand. But more lasting than its monuments was its law, citizenship, and governance. The Romans developed a legal system that would outlive their empire. They defined citizenship, property, contracts, and rights. From the 12 Tables, 450 BCE, to Justinian's Code, Roman law balanced order and flexibility. A Roman citizen, whether born in Spain, Gaul, or Judea, could appeal to Roman courts. Law became a tool of unity, not just punishment. Governors ruled provinces with military and civic authority. Local leaders swore loyalty to Rome. Taxes were collected, roads were patrolled, grain was shipped, census was taken. Rome functioned like a machine. Its laws, structures, and institutions became the model for modern legal systems, especially in Europe and the Americas. But a new force was rising, not built on armies or roads, but on faith. Christianity, rise, persecution, and triumph. In the dusty province of Judea, under Roman occupation, a carpenter's son named Jesus of Nazareth began preaching around 30 CE, calling for love, humility, and a kingdom not of this world. The Roman authorities, fearing unrest, crucified him, but his message did not die. Followers spread his teachings across Roman roads, through cities and ports. At first, Christians were persecuted, thrown to lions, burned, imprisoned. Yet the movement grew. By the 4th century, a Roman emperor, Constantine the Great, had a vision of a cross in the sky. He won a decisive battle and declared Christianity legal with the Edict of Milan, 313 CE. In 325 CE, Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, unifying Christian doctrine. Rome, once the enemy of the faith, became its champion. St. Peter's Basilica, catacombs, and pilgrim routes marked the empire's new spiritual map. But as Christianity rose, the empire began to fracture. The fall of the Western Roman Empire, 476 CE. The 3rd and 4th centuries brought plagues, economic collapse, and invasions, corrupt emperors, divided leadership, internal strife. The empire was split in two, 85 CE, the wealthy Eastern Roman Empire in Byzantium, later Constantinople, and the troubled Western Roman Empire, based in Italy. Germanic tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Ostrogoths, crossed Roman borders. In 410 CE, Rome was sacked by Alaric. The shock was immense, the eternal city violated. By 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. The Western Roman Empire had fallen. But did Rome die? Number it transformed. Rome's legacy. Rome gave us republican government, codified law, Latin language, architecture, roads, calendar, Catholic Christianity, and an enduring idea that civilization is not just about conquest, it's about structure, order, and legacy. Rome became the blueprint for empires to come: Byzantium, the Holy Roman Empire, colonial Europe, even the United States. Because Rome never truly fell, it simply passed the torch. Chapter 9. The Rise of Religions and Philosophies. Civilizations had risen, cities were built, empires had grown, fallen, and returned. Humanity had learned to conquer the land, rule over people, and build lasting systems. But now, something even deeper stirred. We were no longer just asking how to live, but why. This is the era when humanity began to turn inward, to ask questions not of territory, but of truth, to explore the meaning of existence, the nature of suffering, and the path to the divine. From deserts to mountains, temples to caves, new voices echoed across continents. These voices would shape billions of lives for thousands of years. Judaism, the covenant, and the one God. Among the earliest was Judaism, rooted in the ancient Near East, with traditions dating back to 2000 BCE. It began with the story of Abraham, a man who entered into a covenant with a single, invisible God, a radical concept in a world of idols and polytheism. The Hebrews, later known as Israelites, would face exile, slavery, freedom, law-giving, and diaspora. Moses and the Exodus from Egypt, the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai, the Torah, a sacred text written over centuries, chronicling the spiritual evolution of a people chosen not for power, but for purpose. Monotheism, the belief in one singular God, began here, and it would change the world. Zoroastrianism, light and darkness. Around the same time in ancient Persia, another great faith emerged. Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zarathustra, or Zoroaster, possibly around 1000 BCE. It was the first known dualistic religion, seeing the universe as a battleground between Ahura Mazda, wise lord, and Angra Mainyu, destructive spirit. Humans, it said, must choose between truth and lies, light and darkness. Zoroastrianism influenced many later beliefs, from angels and demons to final judgment and messianic prophecy. It was the imperial religion of the Achaemenid Persians and survived even the conquest of Alexander. Though small today, its spiritual DNA runs deep. Christianity, the message of redemption. In the Roman province of Judea, the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth transformed the world. He preached of love, forgiveness, and a kingdom not of this earth. His words defied the legalism of the time, reaching the poor, the sick, the marginalized. Crucified around 30 CE, his followers claimed he rose from the dead. And from that belief, Christianity was born. The apostles, Paul, Peter, and others, carried the message across Roman roads. Letters became scripture. Gospels were written. Christianity spread rapidly despite persecution. By 313 CE, the Roman Emperor Constantine legalized the faith. A century later, it became the empire's official religion. Today, it is followed by over 2 billion people, but its origins are humble, rooted in sacrifice, simplicity, and spiritual revolution. Buddhism, the path beyond suffering. Half a world away, in the foothills of the Himalayas, a prince named Siddhartha Gautama renounced his palace life and set out to understand why humans suffer. Around 500 BCE, he found his answer beneath a Bodhi tree. He became the Buddha, the enlightened one. Buddhism taught that life is suffering, caused by desire, but there is a way out, the Noble Eightfold Path. Right speech, right action, right thought. It emphasized meditation, compassion, and detachment. It spread across India, then eastward to China, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia, adapting and evolving, but always centered on one truth: peace lies within. Hinduism, the eternal Dharma. While Buddhism emerged, Hinduism was already evolving, a shade of ancient Vedic traditions dating back to 1500 BCE. It taught dharma, duty, karma, action, and moksha, liberation. Gods like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva symbolized creation, preservation, and destruction, not separate forces, but aspects of the cosmic cycle. The Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, and Mahabharata offered profound philosophical insight on war, love, divinity, and the self. Unlike many religions, Hinduism had no founder, just layers upon layers of wisdom passed down through priests, songs, and rituals. It is the oldest living religion on earth. Confucianism and Taoism, harmony and the way. In China, philosophy became religion, not through gods, but through virtue. Confucius, 551 to 479 BCE, taught that society thrives on respect, order, and duty. The family was sacred. The emperor ruled by example. Education was the path to nobility, not bloodline. Confucianism shaped Chinese government, ethics, and family life for millennia. At the same time, Taoism, attributed to Laozi, offered a counterbalance, encouraging stillness, surrender to the Tao, the way, and flowing with the rhythms of nature. Where Confucianism was structure, Taoism was spontaneity. Together they created the spiritual balance of East Asia: Islam, revelation, and empire. In the 7th century CE, in the Arabian Peninsula, a merchant named Muhammad received revelations from God through the angel Gabriel. These messages became the Quran, the holy book of Islam. Muhammad preached monotheism, social justice, and submission to one God, Allah. He called for the end of tribal divisions, idol worship, and injustice. By his death in 632 CE, most of Arabia had embraced Islam. Within a century, Islamic armies and scholars had spread the faith from Spain to India. Islam is not just a religion, it is a civilization. The Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 13th century CE. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, especially in Baghdad, Islam became the heart of the intellectual world. The House of Wisdom attracted scholars from every faith, translating Greek, Persian, Indian texts into Arabic. They preserved knowledge that Europe had forgotten and built upon it. Muslim scientists developed algebra from Al-Jabr, revolutionized optics, practiced early surgery, and made advances in astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Libraries, observatories, and universities were built in Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba. The Islamic world connected Europe, Africa, and Asia through trade, language, and culture, a golden thread of enlightenment in a dark age for many. Pilgrimage routes and holy cities. Religions gave meaning, but they also moved people. Jews traveled to Jerusalem, Christians to Rome, Santiago, and later the Holy Land, Muslims to Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, Hindus to Varanasi and the Ganges River, Buddhists to Lumbini, Bodh Gaya, and Mount Kailash. Pilgrimage was more than ritual. It was a spiritual and social network. Along these roads flowed ideas, goods, and cultures, the Crusades and interfaith conflict. But faith also sparked conflict. Between 1095 and 1291, Christian Europe launched a series of crusades, holy wars to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule. These wars led to bloodshed, cultural exchange, and centuries of tension. In Spain, the Reconquista would see Christian kingdoms reclaim territory from Muslim rule by 1492. Meanwhile, Jewish communities faced persecution across Europe, including forced conversions and expulsions. Religious conviction brought out the best and the worst of humanity. Even in a modern world of science and machines, these ideas remain, because they are not just beliefs. They are maps of meaning, etched in stone, text, and heart. Chapter 10. The Global Awakening. The world had long been shaped by kings and conquerors, priests and empires, but by the 14th century, something remarkable began to stir. Not in the fields or battlefields, but in the mind. A change of thought, of vision. A movement that would shatter the silence of the medieval world and ignite a global awakening. In the city-states of Italy, where the ruins of Rome whispered to the ambitious, thinkers began to ask a revolutionary question. What if man was more than a sinner? This was the Renaissance, a rebirth of learning, beauty, and possibility. Leonardo da Vinci dissected bodies to understand muscle movement. Michelangelo carved stone that breathed. Raphael, Brunelleschi, Donatello, each challenged the limits of art, science, and spirit. Patron families like the Medici of Florence transformed cities into cradles of genius. Humanism rejected fear and embraced reason. It celebrated the individual, the thinker, the creator, and its ideas flowed from Italy to the rest of Europe, planting seeds that would later bloom into revolution. But thought is not silent forever. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, questioning Rome's spiritual authority. His protest sparked the Reformation, a firestorm of theological debate, division, and war. Europe fractured into Catholics and Protestants, and with every split came new interpretations, new identities, new conflicts. Out of this chaos came a second movement, the Enlightenment. Voltaire, Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, Kant, thinkers who dared to say, "We can govern ourselves. Reason is enough. Freedom is a right." Their words would reshape kingdoms and birth republics. the printing press, and knowledge explosion. None of this would have spread without one machine, the printing press, perfected by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440. In an age when a book once took years to copy by hand, now thousands could be printed. The Bible became accessible. Literacy exploded. Pamphlets, manifestos, science papers, words became weapons, ideas became immortal. By 1500, over 20 million books were in circulation. The human mind had been uncaged. Scientific revolution, Galileo and Newton. Now, with minds unleashed, eyes turned to the heavens. Galileo Galilei, using a telescope of his own design, saw moons orbiting Jupiter and declared that Earth was not the center of creation. He was silenced, but the truth could not be unlearned. Isaac Newton, through mathematics and optics, laid the laws of motion and gravity. In 1687, his Principia Mathematica redefined physics for centuries. Nature was no longer mystical, it was knowable. The scientific revolution gave us a new universe, rational, discoverable, ordered, and it changed how we see everything. The age of exploration. While minds explored theory, ships explored the world. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, backed by the Spanish crown, sailed west and encountered the Americas. Though he believed he'd found Asia, the encounter would change the world. Meanwhile, Zheng He, admiral of China's Ming Dynasty, led massive fleets between 1405 and 1433 to India, Arabia, and East Africa, showing China's might across oceans. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan began the first circumnavigation of the Earth. Though he died en route, his fleet proved that the world was one sphere, vast, dangerous, and deeply connected. Indigenous civilizations before Columbus. The lands discovered by Europeans were not empty. The Aztecs built Tenochtitlan, a city of canals, temples, and markets that rivaled any in Europe. The Mayans crafted calendars more accurate than their European counterparts and mapped the heavens with astonishing precision. The Incas in the Andes ruled an empire of 10 million people, building roads, bridges, and a society without writing. These civilizations had history, science, law, religion, all destined to collide with colonial ambition, slavery, colonialism, and resistance. With discovery came domination. Europe didn't just explore, it conquered. The transatlantic slave trade stole over 12 million Africans from their homelands, chaining them into the horrors of plantations and mines. Entire cultures were erased. Yet from that darkness, resistance never died. In song, in stories, in revolt. Colonialism ripped across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Empires expanded. Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, Holland, planting flags in blood and gold. But resistance grew. The Haitian Revolution, Zulu uprisings, and quiet defiance in 1,000 languages. Even in chains, humanity whispered, "You do not own me." Chapter 11. Industry, Empires, and Revolution. By the late 1700s, the world stood on the edge of a transformation unlike any seen before. For thousands of years, human power had relied on muscle, wind, and water. But in the shadowed forges of Britain, a new force was being harnessed, one that would reshape the world forever: steam. The Industrial Revolution, 1760 to 1840. The Industrial Revolution was not a single invention, but a cascade of breakthroughs that began in Britain around 1760 and rippled through the world. At its heart was the steam engine perfected by James Watt in 1776. No longer tied to rivers, factories could now run anywhere. Coal and iron fueled the fires. Machines replaced hands. The spinning jenny revolutionized textiles. The power loom mechanized weaving. The steam locomotive and railroads connected towns in days, not weeks. The telegraph carried messages across continents at the speed of electricity. For the first time in history, production outpaced population. Goods were cheaper, cities grew, and time itself seemed to accelerate. But it came at a cost. urbanization and capitalism. As factories rose, so did cities. Rural families moved in search of wages. Towns like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool exploded in size. The air filled with soot. Rivers ran black with dye and waste. Children worked 16-hour days beside machines that could maim or kill. Workers lived in cramped tenements, disease spread quickly, and life expectancy dropped. Still, this new system, capitalism, promised opportunity, private ownership, investment, profit. For some, it brought great wealth. For others, endless toil. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, watching from the slums of industrial Europe, would declare, "Workers of the world, unite!" But that revolution was still to come. The bourgeoisie, factory owners, bankers, and merchants, now held the levers of power. And around them, empires expanded to feed the machines. Empire and exploitation. The factories needed cotton, coal, rubber, tea, and spices. The mines and plantations needed labor. The ports needed control. Britain, now the workshop of the world, built an empire where the sun never set, stretching from India to Africa, from the Caribbean to Hong Kong. France, Belgium, Germany, and the Netherlands followed suit. The industrial world demanded resources, and colonization provided them, often through violence, treaties signed under pressure, or outright war. Indigenous economies were shattered, cultural systems were suppressed, and resistance, as always, never ceased, from the Sepoy Rebellion in India to the Zulu Wars in southern Africa. The Age of Revolution, America and France. But just as machines were transforming factories, revolutions were transforming governments. In 1776, 13 colonies on the eastern coast of North America declared their independence from Britain. The American Revolution was born not just of taxes but of ideas, liberty, self-rule, the consent of the governed. Influenced by Enlightenment thinkers, they drafted the Declaration of Independence and, by 1783, had won their freedom. The United States of America was a radical experiment, a republic in a world of monarchies. That spark soon jumped across the Atlantic. In 1789, France, burdened by debt, famine, and centuries of inequality, exploded into revolution. The Bastille was stormed, the monarchy abolished, the guillotine rose in public squares. For a time, ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity filled the air, but blood followed ideas. Robespierre ruled with terror. Then came Napoleon, who crowned himself emperor and redrew the map of Europe. The French Revolution left a scar, but also a model. People could rise, kings could fall, and power, once believed divine, could now be questioned by the masses. The march forward. By the early 1800s, steam trains cut across nations. Telegraph wires carried thoughts faster than any rider. Empires fed machines, machines fed empires. Urban workers began organizing. Revolutions stirred in Latin America. Slavery was questioned and, in places, abolished. The Industrial Revolution and the Age of Revolutions collided, not just changing how people worked or lived, but how they thought about justice, labor, freedom, and the future. From factory chimneys to political chambers, the world was being remade, not by kings or prophets, but by ordinary people, machines, and ideas. Abolition movements and civil rights. The same era that saw machines rise and empires expand also gave birth to one of humanity's most powerful moral awakenings: the fight to end slavery. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, voices grew louder against the trade that had turned humans into cargo. In 1807, the British Empire outlawed the transatlantic slave trade. By 1833, slavery was abolished throughout its colonies. France followed. Brazil, the last Western nation to hold slaves, would finally abolish slavery in 1888. But abolition was not the end. It was the beginning of a new battle for civil rights. In the United States, the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was fought largely over slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 declared freedom for millions, but the path to equality would take far longer. From Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad to Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and later W.E.B. Du Bois, the cry for dignity echoed through generations. In the 20th century, that cry turned into movement, and the movement into change, the rise and fall of empires. While empires reached their peak in territory and control during the 19th and early 20th centuries, cracks had already begun to form. The Ottoman Empire, once ruling over vast lands in the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe, had earned the nickname the Sick Man of Europe. By 1922, it collapsed, giving rise to modern Turkey and reshaping borders across the region. The British Empire by 1914 covered a quarter of the Earth's land and population, but the very global system it created, of railroads, factories, and mass communication, also awakened demands for independence. Across India, Africa, and the Caribbean, freedom movements simmered. No empire would survive untouched by what came next. The world at war, World War I and II. In 1914, the world plunged into a war unlike any before. Sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, World War I saw empires collide. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Ottomans against Britain, France, Russia, and later the United States. The trenches of the Western Front became symbols of industrial slaughter, where machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and airplanes met human flesh. By the war's end in 1918, over 16 million people were dead. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, redrew borders, punished Germany harshly, and planted the seeds of future conflict. Only 2 decades later, the world was burning again. In 1939, World War II erupted when Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. Allied with Fascist Italy and Imperial Japan, the Axis powers sought domination. What followed was the deadliest conflict in human history. Over 70 million people died. The Holocaust claimed 6 million Jewish lives, alongside millions of others. Cities like Dresden, London, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki became symbols of devastation. The war introduced atomic weapons, changed international law, and ended with 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, staring across an iron curtain. World War II marked the final death knell of colonial empires. Between 1945 and 1975, a tidal wave of independence movements swept the globe. India, Pakistan, Ghana, Algeria, Kenya, and dozens more claimed their freedom. The United Nations, formed in 1945, sought to prevent future global conflict and protect human rights. But new tensions emerged. The Cold War pitted capitalist democracy against communist ideology, dividing the world into spheres of influence. While wars were rarely declared, proxy battles, nuclear standoffs, and ideological competition shaped decades to come. Yet even amidst war and power struggles, revolution took other forms. The civil rights movement in the United States, led by Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, fought systemic racism. Apartheid fell in South Africa, thanks to global pressure and the leadership of Nelson Mandela. Women, long denied a voice, began organizing globally for equal rights, education, and representation. The suffrage movement, begun in the 19th century, became a worldwide wave. Technology, media, and education began breaking down barriers once thought eternal. What this era left behind, from steam engines to space rockets, from slavery to civil rights, from empires to democracy. The modern world was forged in the fire of revolution, invention, and resistance. The next chapter would not be written by emperors or kings, but by nations, by movements, by people who demanded more freedom, more dignity, more future. And the tools they had built would soon take us beyond the earth itself. Chapter 12, The Modern World, from nukes to networks. The 20th century ended with a whisper of triumph and a scream of uncertainty. From atomic warfare to artificial intelligence, from spacewalks to cybersecurity breaches, humanity crossed the threshold into an era defined not by survival, but by scale: planetary, digital, existential. But this era, our era, was shaped by a rivalry that nearly destroyed the world. Cold War, USA versus USSR. In 1945, the world took a breath and then held it for 45 years. As the rubble of World War II smoldered, two superpowers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. Capitalism versus communism. Democracy versus authoritarian control. The world split, not just by borders, but by ideologies. This was the Cold War. No formal battles between them, but proxy wars erupted. Korea, 1950 to 53. Vietnam, 1955 to 75. Afghanistan, 1979 to 89. The fear wasn't just invasion, it was annihilation. 1949. The USSR tested its first atomic bomb. 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world within minutes of thermonuclear war. Children practiced hiding under desks. Bomb shelters were built in backyards. Mutually assured destruction, MAD, wasn't policy. It was prophecy. But alongside the race to arms came another kind of race. From Earth to the stars, space exploration. The Cold War launched humanity into the heavens. 1957, the Soviet satellite Sputnik pierced Earth's orbit. 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. 1969. The world watched in awe as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. From there, we dreamed further. Voyager probes soared past the solar system. International space stations became homes in orbit. Now we look to Mars, not just to visit, but to stay. We reached for the stars, even as we remained divided below. The rise of technology, computers, internet, and AI. While missiles stood poised in silos, another revolution brewed. Silent, digital, invisible. 1940s to 50s, early computers filled rooms. 1969, the ARPANET, the seed of the internet, and it was born. 1980s, personal computers entered homes. 1991, the World Wide Web went public. 2007, the smartphone put the world in our pocket. The world got smaller, borders blurred, ideas, viruses, revolutions, all now moved at light speed. Artificial intelligence, once the dream of philosophers and sci-fi writers, began learning. Machines could now see, speak, listen, translate, drive, and decide. We taught the machine to think. The question was, would it think with us or for us? Globalization, the interconnected web of everything. Trade, travel, finance, culture. Everything was now global. Supply chains spanned continents. Multinational corporations shaped local economies. Social media became the new public square and battleground. The global village was born, but it came with new vulnerabilities. 2008, a financial crisis originating in Wall Street devastated lives worldwide. Power was no longer just in armies or empires, but in data, networks, algorithms, terrorism, and the era of fear. On September 11, 2001, everything changed. 4 hijacked planes, nearly 3,000 dead. The Twin Towers collapsed. The world watched, horrified, live. Terror had entered the modern age, coordinated, global, media-driven. What followed was the War on Terror. Afghanistan, Iraq, drone strikes, black sites. Surveillance ballooned. Patriot Acts and global watch lists redefined privacy. Borders tightened, trust eroded. Security came at a cost. Sometimes truth, sometimes freedom. The climate reckoning. Enter the Anthropocene. But our greatest threat wasn't in missiles or terrorism, it was the mirror. Humans now move more rock and soil than all Earth's rivers combined. We've warmed the planet by over 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. Glaciers retreat, oceans rise, wildfires rage. Species vanish at 1,000 times the natural extinction rate. We've entered a new epoch, the Anthropocene, the age of humans shaping Earth itself. It's not just climate, it's plastics in our blood, microchips in our pets, dead zones in oceans, and carbon in the sky. We've become gods of destruction and creation, capable of reshaping the biosphere and perhaps ending it. Pandemics and the Fragility of Progress. 2020. A virus named COVID-19 brought the world to a halt. Empty streets, overflowing hospitals, billion-person lockdowns. A reminder, for all our satellites and sensors, we are still flesh, vulnerable, connected, mortal. Science raced. Vaccines emerged in under a year. But so did fear, disinformation, inequality. The world split, not by walls, but by trust. The pandemic showed us how connected and how divided we truly are. The future, transhumanism, AI, and the unknown. Today we stand at a threshold. Neural implants are bridging brain and machine. Gene editing is rewriting the blueprint of life. Artificial General Intelligence, AGI, is no longer just theory, it's ambition. Transhumanism, the merging of biology and technology, is rising. What does it mean to be human? When consciousness can be simulated, when bodies are optional, when death can be delayed or even denied. The tools we built to survive, fire, language, iron, code, have brought us here. But what we build next may decide if we end history or begin something new. The final question, from caves to cathedrals, from stone tools to silicon mines, from myth to mathematics, from tribal chants to digital symphonies. Humanity has written a story like no other. But as the next chapter begins, we must ask, can we master the tools we've created, or will they master us? The answers lie not in the stars, but in our hands.